Welcome to In Studio from Simply Timeless. I'm Jay Daniels. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us. We often refer to our weekly gatherings as a journey of musical discovery. And this week, you're going to hear about the life's journey of vocalist Lucy Yeghiazaryan. Her latest album from Cellar Live is called Blue Heaven. These days, Lucy's based in New York City, but her story begins in Armenia. In fact, some of her early musical influence actually came from her dad. Lucy and I recently met at the Hotel Belclair in Upper Manhattan to share some of those stories. And you were telling me about your dad's record collection, but it was not always easy to listen to the vinyl because you didn't have electricity.
Right, it wasn't. And my mother came up with a clever way of using batteries to power this cassette player. So we'd use that most of the time, but that would run out, so, you'd have little snippets of listening sessions, and that was that.
And what were some of those tapes that you listened to as a kid?
Oh, man. My dad was actually really into, soul, and we had a lot of Ray Charles. There was an old, I don't know where he got this. It was a live concert of Ella's where she was singing Flying Home. It was like a 10-minute... 10-minute recording of this thing, and my sisters and I used to just scat along to it. I had no idea what the song was. I didn't know where it was. It was recorded over some other cassette tape. So, and later on, after years, I found the recording and I was like, it was Flying Home, Ella. Interesting.
Yeah.
So,
and that was one of her best recordings of the Lionel Hampton classic too.
I think so. Yeah.
So, you've been a performer for many years, maybe not in the same fashion that you are now as a jazz vocalist, but your first trip to the States was a result of a performance competition that you were a part of as a kid in Armenia.
Yes, it was. So there was this national competition that used to run once electricity got back on that was televised. It was called Do Re Mi. And I won for my age group, and they had a little tour out to LA for the huge Armenian community that resides over there. So we were kind of singing Armenian music there for about a week or so, and that was the first time I visited the States. And then we went back and returned in 2011, right after 9/11. We came to the States as immigrants.
2001, 2002?
Yeah.
So, upon moving to the States, you didn't initially come to New York City. Your first stop was actually in New Jersey.
It was. We moved to New Jersey to a small rural town called West Milford. And we were there for about 8 years or so, and then I went to college in New Jersey as well, and then moved to New York right after that.
How did those experiences impact your life as far as becoming an American?
Well, I do think a lot of immigrants tend to move to urban areas, which I think makes the move easier because there's just a larger group of immigrants in big cities. The town we moved to, we were the only immigrant family, and it was right after 9/11, so there was a lot of tension in the country, and I got to definitely experience some unpleasantries, but I'm happy for it because I think it gave me a good idea of what America is as a country, and the issues that we have, because I got to experience it firsthand, and I'm happy for that.
So it was a good thing for you.
It was. I think it is. I think it would be good for every American to experience that, the urban and the suburban, and every side of the country as best as you can.
What do they call it? Fear of the unknown, I suppose?
I think so, yeah.
We don't know something about a certain topic or a certain person, we make things up.
Yeah, I think that was a large part of it. And it didn't matter to them where we were from. It was just that we were outsiders.
So in thinking about the arts and your performance, you continued in that legacy that was started by your parents with those classic jazz tunes from people like Ella Fitzgerald and others. Did you come here thinking that you were going to make it as a full-time performer, or were you looking to do other things in life after college?
Well, I think as a young kid, I did think that I could potentially, make a living being a musician. But I kind of got disillusioned in college. And I actually have a degree in world history. I only studied music for about a semester, and realized it wasn't for me. I did not think, learning how to sing jazz in college was the way to do it. It didn't feel right. So I stopped and I got a degree in history and intended to kind of go into, I don't know, that. But that didn't work out. So I just started singing again. That just seemed to come easier. So I stuck with that.
And your voice is quite unique. And your delivery, it's so natural and it has this vintage sound. And yet, these are songs and performers that were not even, you came around well after their time.
Yeah.
So how did you develop your own voice? Because you mentioned that you didn't think that it would be, for you at least, that learning jazz in an academic setting was the right way to do it.
Yeah.
So what was the right way for you?
Honestly, listening. There are certain musicians I really love, and just listening to them. And I've always really liked that old straight ahead sound. And I've found that after a certain point, there was a lot of heavy influence on vocal jazz, whether it was from R&B or gospel or kind of funk, which is fine. But there's something that interests me very much about the original kind of straight ahead sound. And I don't think there's very many people that can still sing like that. So I'm kind of obsessive over that. And I try to keep it free of any influence, whether it's pop or, whatever.
And your latest release, Blue Heaven, it does feature an organ trio, more or less, as your backing ensemble.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, it's guitar, bass, drums, yeah.
But these are songs like My Blue Heaven, Walter Donaldson, which comes from, I think, 1930, somewhere along that era, just ahead of the Depression. And I was talking with you about the sound. And these are songs on the album that have been done dozens of times by dozens of talented artists. And yet, for me personally, as a radio host aside, just as a casual listener, there was something so fresh and so inviting about the sound that I couldn't stop listening once I heard it. What do you attribute that to? Is there anything special? Some sort of magic that you have within the ensemble sound with?
That group I've been playing with for a long time. The bass player Daniel Duke and Greg Ruggiero, who's on guitar, were some of the first people that I started playing with in New York, and I've learned a lot from both of them. And then the drummer Steve Williams played for Shirley Horn for over 30 years. So I think, at the risk of maybe exaggerating a bit, I think he is currently kind of the best drummer for a singer. He just has a subtlety that is so tempting and easy to play with. So they, they're just great musicians for a singer, so they definitely helped out. But I think that tune in particular, it's the last one on the album, and I kind of ordered the songs in a way, they're all love songs, right? But I ordered them in a way to make it, to give it the history of love, young love, because what's the first, Sweet Pumpkin, right? So I start out with this kind of, you could say juvenile, silly kind of love.
Yeah.
That slowly kind of grows bitter towards the middle too, and then in the end resolves itself, and the last tune is kind of about hanging out with your husband and your baby next to a fireplace, and what could be more comfortable and happy and kind of relaxed than that, after all the ups and downs of love. I would hope that's where you find your peace, and I'm glad that kind of came across in the vibe of the song.
We're speaking with Lucy Yeghiazaryan. She just released the album on Cellar Live called Blue Heaven. Do these stories, the inspirations for the album, do some of them come from your own experiences that you've had in this roller coaster that we call life?
I definitely have. I mean, I've always been a romantic, and I've had a few loves, Some of them, nothing too crazy, nothing too tragic, but things come and go, and you learn a little bit from every one of those experiences. And yeah, I think so. I could definitely relate each tune to somebody or a relationship I had or something.
Who do you think are the people that will listen to this album the most? I mean, is there a target audience that you have necessarily?
I think younger people who haven't checked out older, straight ahead stuff, I hope would enjoy it. To be honest, I kind of put this out intending it to be an album that you could put on and listen to, or you could put on and cook or do whatever you're doing around the house. And that, in a way, I know it sounds silly, but for me, some of my favorite records are like that. Like, I can put it on and I can actively listen to it, or I can put it on and just kind of do my thing. I think all good music is kind of like that. It can work both ways.
Do you ever listen to your own albums?
I do not. I never, ever do. I only listen through once after I record, just to kind of make sure there's nothing too horrible in there. But that's it. And no, I don't.
Neither do. I've recorded one album.
All right. And do you listen to it?
I listened to it once when we were doing the remaster, and I said, that's it.
All right. Well,
I don't want to listen to it again.
Yeah, I think a lot of musicians feel this way about their own work.
Would you say that you're highly critical of your own? How so?
And I'm never satisfied with anything I sing.
Really?
Yes. Yes.
So
maybe to a fault, but.
So I mean, on your next project, I mean, you've already achieved quite a wonderful sound, and again, it's one of these that you can listen to it again and again, and it never gets old. Mm-hmm. It has a very timeless appeal. Mm-hmm. But I mean, you say it's never good enough, or that there's always something. So what would you do differently, or for the next project?
Well, I always have a hard time it's hard to record in a studio. I don't think I'm alone in that. It just kind of makes you play differently when you're in a studio. So I'm hoping to be more relaxed next time, and maybe have a little bit of the energy that you have at live shows, which is hard to bring into the studio, but I would like to have more of that in the next album.
What do you think about recording a live album?
One day. The sound's never as good as you'd like it to be on live albums, but yeah, I mean, I'd be interested. We'll see how that goes.
And you talk about wanting this to be targeted, or hoping that younger audiences will tune in, people our age or a little bit younger. But it is difficult to be able to introduce them to music that they otherwise might not be seeking out.
Yeah.
Because somebody said it this way. They said, we seem to have an overabundance of music, that you can go on any of the streaming services and find any sort of music that you want. But sometimes, because of that, it's hard to steer people in a certain direction.
I agree. Yeah.
So how are you doing that? Because surely, I mean, some of your own friends, some of the people that you know are in that age bracket. What are you doing to encourage them to listen to this music, even if they have never listened to jazz before?
That's a good question. And I think I do it well in a live performance. That's the easiest way to capture the audience. And I pride myself on the fact that I don't, for example, in the studio, I never use booths. The entire album was recorded in one room within 2.5, 3 hours. So, yeah, we did 1 or 2 takes of everything. And I think it's important to keep that integrity, because if you can't do it live, then you really shouldn't be tweaking it at the studio. So it's easy for me to capture people, even if they're young, even if they've never heard the music, if they're right there in front of me. Otherwise, you're right. I mean, it's so oversaturated. And I think that's with time. I'm kind of new on the scene, so I'm hoping with time my name will appear more frequently, and it'll draw more of a crowd,
So how has this work impacted you? I mean, you've had quite a journey. You come from the other side of the world, and you come here, and now you're putting your heart out there. You're putting yourself out there through your recorded work, through your live work. I mean, how has this impacted you, for better or for worse?
I think a lot of immigrants have a certain kind of an insecurity where you're always trying to prove yourself. Like, yes, I'm worthy enough to be in this country and I have something to bring to it. But you never quite feel like you're American in a strange way. And I think putting this album out and having worked in New York for 4 or 5 years now, it's kind of given me the sense that, hey, maybe I am American, you know? It's stabilized me more, I think, and made me a little more sure about singing this music.
But you will always, part of your heart will always be back home. And some of the work that you do is reflecting on your Armenian heritage through your performances and through some of your work on social media. So what are ways that you can also reflect upon your heritage through what you do?
Well, that's an interesting question because I think a lot of people take a funny route of mixing the two kinds of music, which I've always been opposed to.
Yes.
So I'll never do the fusion thing. I do think my singing style is very reflective of Middle Eastern singing. If you listen to a lot of Arabic singers, female singers, the kind of power that they have, it's the sort of projection you have to have in Middle Eastern music, I think is present in the way that I sing, in my sound. But I don't use the same idiom. I'm kind of a classist when it comes to singing jazz. When you're singing jazz, just sing jazz. I'm not interested in infusing anything else in there. But in terms of bringing in my heritage, I'm going to Armenia on November 1st, doing the first festival there, the jazz festival there. And I'm a proud Armenian, but I'm also American, and I love singing American music, and it kind of speaks to me more so.
One final thought. Of all the many things you could do in life, whether it could be a librarian with your world history degree, whether it could be a musicologist, or any other thing, why music? What makes it so personal for you?
Sometimes when work isn't going so well, say you have a couple days where you haven't worked, my disposition towards the world is so dark. And then when I play a show, I get out and it's like, it's all gone. I think that's how you know what you should be doing. Whatever that thing is that makes you kind of put all the troubles aside. And I think when I sing, that's the only time I can really honestly do that. So I realized that's the only thing I should be doing.
Lucy Yeghiazaryan, our in-studio guest this week from Simply Timeless. Her new album is called Blue Heaven, and it's available from Cellar Live. We look forward to the great things ahead in Lucy's career. Until we meet again, I'm Jay Daniels, thanking you for joining us in studio